an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Elder Empire, See Book 2 of Dawn and Darkness, chapters 11 and 12. In these chapters, it turns out that Calder and company have also gone to Silver Reach, but shit had pretty much gone down by then, and they come on a ghost town. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is here in the chat with me to feed me info, as I will doubtless be forgetting various things. I just want to say off the top that I think this is the shortest section. George is the one who broke down how I was going to be reading the first of these two books. And for whatever reason, I think George's version didn't have the right page counts on Kindle or something. It wasn't showing up for George. And it was for me. So I did the breakdown for the second book. And this was only 30 pages. And I can't tell you my distress when I realized that I already had to stop listening, and also that I had nobody to blame for this breakdown but myself. Tragic. But honestly, unless I stop mid-chapter, there isn't a lot of, other ways to break these down most of the time. So what can you do? And considering I went over last episode and I was kind of rushing towards the end, it makes sense because that was a bigger section. That was an even 50 pages pretty much. And just because I did go over a little bit, I just want to take a step back and reference the way that wound up, because I did have to rush through it, but it's a really fascinating, it's sort of the moment where things turn for the better, in my opinion, because I've said before that Calder and Shera aren't actually as at odds with each other as it would look like they are. If they stopped and talked to one another, I maintain that they would realize in many ways they're actually on the same side. And in the last chapter, we get Meia, indeed, taking some time to talk to Calder, and the two of them realizing that they are, their goals, if not identical, they are both people who have consciences and are aware that there is a bigger game being played and are doing their best within that. But it's not until this chapter that we hear Kellerac literally tell Jyrene the main thing that she needs to ensure is that Shera and Calder never talk to one another. And it's fascinating because it implies to me that what I said was right, that they actually are sort of, they do have the same, I say they both have a conscience about Calder and Meia, but I hesitate to say that about Shera and Calder. Not that Shera doesn't have a conscience at all. She does, but it's very specific. Her conscience isn't the kind of overall moral compass that most of us have. It's something that engages in particular situations only. That said, Kellerac's sentiment that they should not be allowed to speak to one another points to me in the direction of them being dangerous if they team up somehow. And I have so many questions about what's going on there. Jyrene, she's such a well-written character. I maintain if it weren't for who she works for, Jyrene would be delightful. I would really like her. I would genuinely enjoy her willingness to like put herself in danger and go on adventures and do the sort of wacky thing. And yet, because of her alliances and her beliefs, everything that she does has this edge that I can't forgive. And that whole thing, as we know, winds up with Lucan dead. And I just hate this all so much. I truly do. But let's take a step back here. We start in chapter 11, 9 years ago. Half a year after delivering Urziah to the arena. Half a year after delivering Urziah. I didn't think we were going to make this big a jump ahead in time. I thought something was going to happen that meant he didn't actually have to turn around and come back for Urziah. That he would be able to overpower 8 and 9 feels a little bit strong. That suggests something that I don't think was possible. But I don't know, maybe that he could have bribed them or come to some other kind of arrangement. And instead, it looks like what he said is exactly what's happening. He has sent Urziah on and is basically hoping that Urziah will remember what he said and be like prepared to join him if he returns for him. And I guess because we know that Urziah winds up with him, that works out. But I was a bit dismayed to realize that we were going to be picking up after Urziah was already gone. Jyrene had taken to the work of a pilot. She scanned the horizon, charted their course, studied their position by the stars, and logged whatever deadly creature or impossible phenomenon they encountered during the day. She enjoyed, as she called it, quote, planning a safe route through an endless maze of horror and death, unquote. And Calder is thinking about how the two monsters in his life, who he names as the Liathatan and Andal, he has grown more used to them. In Andal's case, what's frustrating is that he's extremely useful and like on top of his shit. And because of that, as much as Calder wants to discount him or seize control from him or sort of imply that his services are not required, he keeps like knowing more about the situation, having his eye on things that Calder is not paying attention to, and overall is a better manager. Calder, wanting to be the emperor, is starting to look more and more understandable to me, because the emperor is going to be big picture. And then he has people who attend to the more like specific work and situations and handling of personnel. And I feel like maybe that's not such a bad position after all. Granted, the way that their emperor functioned was not exactly that way, because he was like a being of such power that the rules don't apply to him. And I think we can all admit that. But in terms of the kinds of emperors that they will probably have now that they have lost their, 1,000-year-old human being, maybe we've got to expect a little bit more of a traditional setup. And I feel like Andal is the kind of right hand that a lot of people who work in managerial positions or who own businesses wish they had. I mean, if I had an Andal, are you kidding? It is the thing that's so hard is that the reason I think Andal is treating things this way and is so on top of stuff is because he doesn't consider this ship to be Calder's. So he has a really different motivation and a different attitude, because from his perspective, this is his, and he has to do his best to take care of it and make sure everything runs smoothly, because Calder's success is sort of his entire job. Andal's entire job. And that's how everybody who employs people wishes their employees behaved. Like, I am thinking I will either inherit this business or be able to take it over at some point. And so they approach everything from the angle of, this is incredibly important to me. It's the dream. So yeah, he's having trouble pushing back against Andal continually because the guy is just genuinely really good at his job. And then Laaffitan, he finally starts to think, because he was sort of hoping that they would develop a more, I don't want to say cordial relationship, but maybe that's the right word. But regardless, Calder begins to realize, like, okay, we're just not going to be friends. Like, this thing hates everybody. But it's got this, like, agenda that I'm realizing is going to take it centuries to fulfill. And I'm over here sort of getting worried about it. And maybe I shouldn't, because I'm probably not even going to be alive when it makes its next move. So I guess I'll just make my peace with the fact that we are going to have a sort of uncertain relationship with each other. And I do think that's the best way to go. It's really tough, though, again, because we saw how the Emperor trusted that he had all this time. And it turned out that the Great Elder was aware he would think that and, like, fucked with him using that expectation. So I hesitate to, like, get too comfy, you know? But what can you do? George is talking about Jyrene. I think I love that she feels like a twist on the classic protagonist. She is so similar to every other book's male protag that is so excited for danger and wants to explore, just with her cultist beliefs instead of some righteous code or god. Yeah, George, this is the thing that I find really fun about Will's writing, is that he can take a character that we've seen before, like a very similar vibe, and he will just change something kind of that feels sort of insignificant about them, and it makes the whole vibe feel different. And I said before about, like, you know, there being a character who's a reader who has a much more mentally focused superpower versus somebody who is an amazing fighter. And usually it's a guy who's the amazing fighter, and it's the women who have, like, the mental abilities. Not to say that those mental abilities aren't super powerful necessarily. It's not like the female character is, like, inherently weaker, but it is a different kind of power that doesn't require the same sort of confrontational, you know what I mean? And so it often is women who have that sort of ability in stories where people have superpowers. And all he did was make it Shera and have, like, a guy be her kind of sidekick with the mental power. And it felt entirely fresh, completely different, you know? This is something that I want to internalize personally if I ever do decide to try writing seriously again. Tropes are not an inherently bad thing, but you have to figure out what makes them a trope exactly. And if you can pinpoint that, you can play with it and do something that feels different, even if it isn't actually that different. Because nothing is really that different. Let's be honest. Most stories have been told in one way or another, and there's very little out there that's entirely original. Just accept it and move on. But yeah, I completely agree, George. And I would really love for her to wake up and realize what a hazardous game she's playing. She doesn't seem aware of it. But I also don't really know if she's wrong. I feel like she's wrong. But I don't know much more about the elders than anybody in this world. Like, all I know is what the characters have told me. So I have to be honest, I'm coming from a place of, like, really intense judgment against Jyrene. And every time I begin to have this strong feeling of like, oh, you are such an idiot, I have to remind myself, but what if she's not? What if there is a way and they just haven't found the way to communicate yet, the way to team up yet? And again, it's a very circular line of thinking, because then you're like, well, if they haven't found the way yet, what do they believe they're going to be able to do differently? The Sleepless, you know? But I just can't help the complete and utter faith that she has. To me, appears to be based on no evidence. It's purely aspirational. That's the impression I'm getting. And maybe the Sleepless know things that we don't. Maybe they have had experiences that we have not. And I have yet to see that. But from where I'm standing, it really does just sort of feel like we hope that we can make use of this incredibly powerful creature and its knowledge, because we can't imagine why it is here if it isn't meant for us to sort of exploit in a way. And I don't see any evidence that that's going to work. And I wish that I knew why Jyrene is so certain, because she's so certain. Anyway, okay. So, they have a new passenger, Mr. Valette. He was thin as a fence post, with expensive spectacles and long gray sideburns, and he had a tendency to frown at Calder as though expressing deep, heartfelt disappointment. Only one thing ruined the impression: his long black coat. He refused to work, refused even to acknowledge when Calder asked him to carry a box or tighten a line. He would simply frown and walk away. The passenger seemed to spend most of his time scribbling in a journal, which he kept tucked away in the inner pocket of his coat. And God, I wish I had that kind of energy. He gets asked to do something and he just looks at Calder and frowns and is like, and then leaves. I wish I could channel that kind of like willingness to just put my foot down, but I am a people pleaser, and somebody asks me to do something, I'm gonna do it. Even if it's not really my job, I just can't help myself. So this is when Calder says, if you'll pardon me asking, what does the Black Watch need in the town of, he had to glance down at the log to remember the name of their destination. Silver Beach. And as soon as he says this, of course, having read the previous book, I was like, oh, shit. And basically the dude is like, I don't get why you think that I'm going to answer your question. I'm really surprised that you would even ask it. And frankly, if Bliss were here, I think she would do something kind of unpleasant to you, because she would wonder how you have the gall to act like you should get that kind of information. And Calder replies, well, I understand, but considering the nature of your business, this information could affect the safety of everyone on board. I wouldn't want to run into any trouble with elder spawn, after all. And he finally says, I don't anticipate trouble. And that's as much as he gets. So Calder goes over to talk to Jyrene, who is super, super bored. And she mentions having heard of the name Silverreach, the town. And she says, if I've heard about it, something must have happened there. We should do some research. And Calder is like, research, huh? And she's like, yeah. Steal his journal. And as they're talking about this, Andal walks in. This is so horrible. I thought you should know we had a beetle problem. Half of the barley will have to be thrown overboard, and we'll have to filter the quick lamp fluid. Calder nodded to the barrel. Is that the barley? The beetles, he said. They tried to mutiny, so I had to quell their rebellion. Show them who owns this ship. The lid of the barrel started to surge upwards, as though something inside was pushing its way out, until Andal sat on it. Seated comfortably on the barrel of beetles, Andal pulled his hat off and began fanning himself. I hate this. Look, we all have the things that we don't like. And for me, I don't like medical experimentation. I don't like heights. And I don't like bugs. I could deal with spiders. Honestly, spiders just feel different to me. I could deal with a spider. It's not the same. A bug, I can't. I hate. And the idea that this barrel is either filled with so many beetles that they are pushing the lid up off it, or is filled with bigger than average beetles that are strong enough to push the barrel up. Either one of those is absolutely unacceptable, and I don't appreciate being reminded throughout this conversation that this barrel is full of beetles, because it comes up a few times. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. And I'm assuming that something is going to come up with these little guys. I'm just concerned about it. That's all I'm going to say. Bugs are the kind of thing that I have an absolutely visceral reaction to. And if you speak to my husband, you will probably get to hear some rather entertaining stories of me absolutely hitting the fucking ceiling a couple of times when we found bugs in our home. I want to know what is going on in the barrel, just out of like my own morbid sense of curiosity, but also I would like to never find out. So he's like, so what's this I hear about a theft? And they immediately say, oh, we were planning to rob you. And I love the way we were going to wait until you were asleep, go through your coat, take away all your valuables. Not my precious valuables. Oh, God, that's very good. And Angela's like, well, it's a good thing that you were planning on robbing me instead of our passenger, as we wouldn't want the Black Watch finding out we had any breaches of conduct. Not only would they feed us to elder spawn, they wouldn't pay us. The barrel under him shuddered, the beetles struggling to escape, but Andal didn't seem to notice. No. And Calder tries to say, why don't you just dump the beetles overboard? And Andal says, why are we going to get rid of perfectly good beetles? For my own peace of mind, Andal, how about that? I hate it. I really do. It was so distracting. So anyway, it turns out Andal has gone and copied the guy's entire journal. He's like, well, lucky for you two. The fact that you want information it's not a trait exclusive to you as a pair. I also am not a big fan of being told, we're going here and I'm not going to tell you anything further. So he says, all I needed was a few minutes the day before and after I laundered his coat. He's fastidiously clean. And Calder tries to say, please take the wheel while we study this in my cabin, in a way that felt almost like he was trying to cut Andal out of it. And I was like, man, if he copied this information into the book, he knows what's in it already. I wasn't sure if Calder was really thinking this through. And Andal says, I've already read it. I won't spoil the surprise. Surrender the helm and I'll see if I can bring us back on course. Okay, so Calder reads it and is just like, I don't understand this. Andal acted totally calm. And this is fucked up. We are sailing into an area that may very well have been taken over by an elder. An elder. As a great elder. Not just spawn. And yet, Andal just did not seem particularly worried about it. The reports taken in tandem with Bliss's commands and Valette's notes, told a frightening story. Farmers in the region report sightings of what they describe as 10-legged spiders running through their fields at night. These sightings are often accompanied by the usual signs: stolen livestock, missing books, strange signs cut into cornfields. When the community contacted the local Black Watch chapter house, we responded with a standard investigation. However, it reached no conclusion. In southern Izeria, we cornered a hive of inquisitors. They had abducted the elderly and those of mental infirmity, taking them to a cave for a ritual preparation we believe was intended to invoke the void. Watchmen on scene were able to contain the elder spawn, but this behavior suggests an uncharacteristic boldness. Inquisitors are usually content to watch. And because I don't know if the term inquisitor has been used before, but I was wondering, they call it a hive, but then when it says a ritual intended to invoke the void, I was like, wait, is that the title of somebody who works for the sleepless? But no. The 10-legged arachnid elder spawn, also called inquisitors, had become active all over the empire. As one entry put it, for elder spawn to work with such coordination and precise timing suggests a greater intelligence at work. I think we all understand the nature of that intelligence. So, these arachnidish creatures are so here's my sort of confusion, I guess. They are trying to do something to, quote, invoke the void. And my limited understanding of what it is that great elders can do makes this feel surprising, because invoking the void through a ritual feels like the sort of thing that human beings would have to do, because it is so disconnected because human beings do not have a relationship with the great elders, right? And my assumption would have been that if a great elder is awake and exerting any sort of control, that great elder could just open the way to the void itself. That was my assumption. And maybe what I'm saying is true. It's just that this is the way that elder would accomplish it. And I guess it just feels so roundabout in a way that I find really surprising, because I was assuming the link between great elders and the void would be a lot stronger, and there would be a way for them to do it that completely sidestepped anything like, a ritual, having to take human beings to accomplish it, whatever it is that they're trying to do. So this whole thing really confused me for a little bit, and I remain a little confused. I understand what he's saying is going on here, but it still feels like, oh, I really misunderstood the power that the great elders have, or the connection to the void, or I feel like somewhere along the way I got a false understanding of what it is they can do. And that has kind of been a bit of a problem with the elders mostly, to be honest, is what they can accomplish feels really nebulous in a way that sometimes can seem like whatever they need to be able to do or not be able to do can be invented for the scene, and doesn't really need to be it feels ungrounded in a way. And part of the point of the elders is that their abilities are not grounded. So it's really hard, this is a kind of thing that I can understand why he hasn't very specifically delineated what they can do, but also it leads to these kinds of moments of confusion and surprise, and having to recontextualize things that I had thought were a given before, or rethink the way I believe things are going to turn out. And it leaves me feeling a little adrift. And then Bliss says the town was built on Akmagut's tomb, which seems like a really silly place to build a town, so maybe they deserve it. But I guess their ancestors are really the ones who built it. Either way, they really should move. The Inquisitors only act together under the orders of their lord Akmagut, and he's dead. For now. If Akmagut is alive again, it is quite possible we are all moving according to a plan he laid out more than 2,000 years ago. You should travel to Silverreach and determine if the Great Elder has revived. You'll be able to tell. If he has, we'll have to schedule Silverreach for destruction. There is always the possibility that you will not return from this assignment, in which case I will assume you have been captured and tortured by Akmagut and adjust my plans accordingly. I hope that does not happen, because then I would have to send 300 silver marks to your widow, and that is expensive. Be safe. Ah, Bliss. Oh, George is in the chat. I think the void is just some kind of large concept of emptiness. We heard about void transmissions when Jyrene gets messages through a dark portal passage / empty space. That could be true about Great Elders not needing rituals, but I assumed that Akmagut was just curious about rituals or other ways to open the void. I assumed the point was not to open the void, but the ritual itself. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't really think about that, but considering that he's all about, like, understanding and just gathering information, that would make sense. Okay, I can accept that. And Calder, basically, his blood is running cold at reading this. He is just like, oh my God, we have got to turn around, and we have got to turn around yesterday. And Jyrene is stoked. What if he's alive? Can you imagine it? The Emperor is the only one who's ever seen Akmagut directly. Sometimes it was hard to tell when Jerry was joking. I desperately want Calder to hear the words that Jyrene is saying to him. This is like a classic case of ignoring the red flags, where you attribute the meaning that you want to something because the idea that that person could be as unfamiliar to you, really, somebody that you don't know as well as you thought, is too scary. And every time that he decides to just sort of overlook a thing that Jyrene says, I just want to slap and shake him. Sir, look, I understand that because I have read ahead into your future, I have an unfair advantage in knowing what happens with Jyrene and what it is that she's actually up to. That said, I flatter myself that all of these things that have happened over the years and the comments that she's made, that I still would have been able to figure out something was going on with her. And I don't know if it's just the fact that Calder is like in love with her, and that is all that is causing him to overlook this, or if it's also he has never met anybody who has been excited about meeting elders before. Like, she is just such an anomaly that he can't comprehend that there is a person who would say this and be serious about it. But either way, I just really want to be like, Calder, what do you think, taken as a whole, all of these other weird comments and things mean when you put them together and look at them? But he never wants to do that. He never wants to put them together and look at them. George says, we heard in the first C book that Andal was always suspicious of Jerry. That's right. I forgot about that. So yeah, other people are out here like figuring some shit isn't right. And Calder was really pissed, I think, if I remember correctly, when Andal suggests that maybe Jyrene isn't who she says. Calder lashes out at Andal, if I remember, and winds up figuring out that he was right. Just Calder, like, what is it that you really, buddy? You think that this is just idle commentary? Does that sound like her? She isn't somebody who does anything idly. She's a very purposeful human being who has missions and things that she is like very clearly goal oriented. I don't know. So he says that we're possibly like heading straight into death. And I can't believe that this fucking Blackwatch guy accepted this mission. And Jerry says Calder, he agreed because it's worth the risk. That's the mission of the Blackwatch, studying the elders in the service of humanity. You remember. And you know your mother supervises everything the guild head does. Even if Bliss would have killed a man just to learn something, would she? And a part of me is kind of like, maybe. I don't really know Elsa very well. I would like to think that she is better than that, but I don't know. He is, of course, thinking, oh, she would never. And I have to assume it's because he has gotten to know her as his mother and doesn't want to think that of her. But I am not as confident. Obviously, Calder has some blind spots when it comes to what the people he what the people that he loves are capable of. I don't know why that was so hard for me to articulate. So he finally says we don't have to change course. And she smiles and leans forward and gives him a kiss. And he has a moment of like complete shock. If he didn't know her so well, he would have thought she was too excited about going to town. But she had no reason to care other than her boredom and her desire to go ashore. Maybe that was enough. Ah, buddy. Ah, bruh. So, Calder has spent some time thinking to himself about what it is that they may find in the town. And when they reach Silverreach, and it turns out to be completely empty, he has already theorized about all of the various things that they could run into, that finding it empty, he's like, all right, this is like one of the scenarios that I sort of thought through. And what's so weird is that it's not empty in the sense of everybody has fled. All of the ships are still in the little bay. They are filled with fish, like they went and did their fishing trip and just left everything afterward. There's no sense of an urgent evacuation. There's no sense that we were all, beginning to realize that something was going on and decided as a group to begin to defend ourselves or flee. It feels, at one point, Andal talks about how, or no, it's not Andal, it's the Blackwatch guy, that he says in their kitchens and stuff, things have been like washed and folded and put away very neatly, like people who are going on vacation and just want to come back and find their house in decent shape. And that was the thing that got me a little bit, is the idea of like, we know that the people in this town were not in control of themselves towards the end. And them being essentially sort of possessed by this power, and that power having them put everything in impeccable order before they abandon their home. I don't know why that is so scary, but I think it's because it indicates a level of possession that is a lot more intense than I would think. When you think of somebody being possessed, a lot of the time there's a sense of like, yes, it's in control of them, but not in a specific everyday way. It can make it people do what it, as a demon, let's say, wants, which is take other people over or kill them or, have your head spin around and throw up pea soup. But if you were possessed and suddenly you just became amazing at being an accountant, And that was one of the things, like, you were just the way that you kept the books was fucking flawless. It would make it feel like this thing could influence other parts of your regular everyday life. And maybe even make it better. Like, not to say, obviously we know Akmagut is a monster that will, like, disassemble people just to see what happens. But it's hard to, like, see order of this nature that's purely domestic and feel evil in it. It just feels like, wait, really? And I just, yeah, it brings a different level to things for me. So I was expecting to question the locals. However, I very much doubt there's anyone here in the shape to be questioned. I would be willing to pay an additional fee if you would assist me. I am not a reader. I have to do all my research the tedious way, and I don't think it likely I will be able to do so here. And Calder is like, dude, I don't need to come with you or go into these homes to tell you what I sense. I feel intent in the air here, and that is not a normal thing. He describes it as intent being like a stain that sort of leaches into objects, and it's not something that should just be in the air the way that it is here, but it is. And that indicates just on its own that something is not okay. And let's see, we won't gain anything, but the citizens of the Empire trust the guilds to prevent things like this from happening. If we can learn anything here that prevents Elder Spawn from emptying another village, that is worth some risk. And that's what Andal says. So Calder is like, all right. Jerry says, lower the boat, Mr. Martin, we're going ashore. And he suddenly thinks, if you're not giving the orders, you're not the one in charge, which is a quote from Esther 6. And he's just like, I guess that's that. And Calder just keeps finding himself in these situations where he wants to be the guy in charge and he's just not really. I find that very funny. So there's something strange, something that violates common sense. It feels as though the people of this town were passionate about research. Too much so. It's like 1,000 people were so desperate for answers that their hearts might burst. He tried to shake away the lingering impressions, a thirst for knowledge, an inquisitive spirit desperate to be satisfied. Jerry leaned over with her hands behind her back. And he would have suspected that the unquenchable curiosity belonged to Jerry if he didn't know better. You don't know better. You keep doing that, sir. Calder, you need to get some fucking objectivity, my friend. This is gonna really fucking come back to bite you, man. And, like, we know it will in this specific instance, but, like, more than this, probably. So he says someone wanted very much to have answers to all their questions, but it was a hunger. I wouldn't be surprised to hear these people all stabbed each other over a riddle, which was a neat way to sort of summarize that. And this is when Valette comes back and says, evidence suggests these people packed up and left. There are no meals on the tables, no clothes strewn on the floor. Everything is tucked away so neatly, I would almost expect the town itself is a fake. They left of their own volition. No one made them sort their candlesticks in the middle of kidnappings. Which, again, I just really want to see the inside of these houses and exactly what this tidiness looks like, because I have to assume the kind of, like, cleanup that Akmagut would want would look really different than what you or I would call a tidy home. So Valette is just like, all right, well, that's pretty much all I've got. And I think we are going to have to take off. And then all of a sudden, Andal shoves his pistol into his belt and starts sprinting. And they find this poor little boy who is evidently like somebody who managed to survive this, but he's in rags. He's in bad shape. And he is fighting against them and trying to tell them to keep their voices down when the spiders are going to come back. And Andal asks, what do they do? What do they look like? And he says they take everything apart and put it back together. Everything. Which, if that isn't a chilling line, I don't know what is. Ending it with everything. Oh, dislike. There is a, for those of you who are patrons, every Halloween season record something called Unspookled, and it's a series of like allegedly true scary stories that I will edit into a sort of half-hour long episode with sound effects and everything, just for something fun and spooky to listen to around the holiday. And a few years ago, I recorded one that was about a Native American creature that was sort of meant to be similar in that it takes the form of creatures that it sees, and it will do so with things usually that are on the verge of death already. It doesn't take apart, for example, perfectly healthy deer. If a deer has died or is near death, the creature will sort of like take on its appearance in a way, and often won't really imitate its movements correctly, or they will put certain limbs in the wrong place by accident, kind of thing. Like a kid who just gets a look at something and then goes off with like a paper and pen to try and draw it from memory right away. And I kept thinking about that with this, because that's one of the scarier stories that I found. And, you know, again, it's allegedly true. Is it? Probably not. But it was very well done. And I read it and got like the hairs of my neck standing up. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and record this one. And it's a fairly long one, but you can find Unspookled stuff on the website if you're a patron and listen to that playlist. And it's pretty fun. So, George says, sounds like a mist wraith. Kind of. Not, but I see what you mean. Yeah. So of course the Watchman is taking notes on all of this, the fact that the Inquisitors are here, and Calder is like, all right, we are going to get the fuck out of here. And the kid realizes that they have a ship. They are going to be able to take him away from this. And I am so scared, because it could go either way. This kid could manage to escape and they do save him, or he winds up not surviving. You know, as far ahead in this story as we wind up, I don't remember a kid whose age would be like anywhere appropriate to be this person, but like grown up. And maybe I just am forgetting somebody, but I want him to make it. I want there to be at least one person who gets away from this. And I'm not sure that I'm going to get it, because these things are really scary. So they begin to hear footsteps, but it's not like the kind of sound that one would think spiders would make. It just sounds like people's shoes. And this kid immediately yells, run. And they all like, it's just one of those things where I think the energy of panic overwhelms everyone's desire to ask questions, and they all follow him without questioning at all. And they get so close to the ship. Calder is trying to sort of summon it if he can, trying to do anything to link with his soulbound vessel for help, and it just isn't possible. From the water on either side of the dock, spiders the size of wolves splashed up and clambered over onto the dock, which the idea that they were underwater, that just genuinely didn't occur to me. And I already don't like things that are supposed to be underwater very much. Never mind things like this. For the first time, he wished the sun had set completely, then he wouldn't have to see them. They had 10 sharp segmented legs, though 2 swayed bent upward at all times like arms, and they were covered in eyes. The segment he would dubiously term the head was crammed full of eyes of every description. Compound eyes, slitted reptilian eyes, even eyes that looked disturbingly human. Some of the eyes waved on stalks, which drifted towards the humans. Ew. And at one point he sees one that has 11 legs. It was as though they had been assembled from a child's kit instead of born, which is like kind of what happened, I would say. And both him and Andal pull their weapons and begin firing. And both the Elder Spawn just sort of tilt their heads, and they don't really react or seem to be either perturbed or in any way even really noticing that they've been shot. And Mr. Villette says, "Mr. Patronus, Captain Martin, I'll thank you to take care of the one on the left. Drive it into the water if you can. I will seal the limbs of the one on our right that we may take it home for study." And I honestly felt like that was extremely ambitious. Take it home for study. My friend, come on. And this is when the people turn up. And they're saying, "Praise Akmagut, you have come at the right time." The whole, like, don't despair. And then Shuffles from the ship just yells, "Despair," the way that he does. And I can't get enough of Shuffles doing this at the most inopportune times. The elder gave no sign it had heard Calder's call. It sat still, hunger and ambition and wariness and calculation all swirling in its ancient mind. As Calder and his crew were dragged away, it simply watched and waited. So I guess we shall see what happens there. Then we go to 12. Calder is taking this weird green sludge bath that is supposed to help with the damage that he took from the explosion, I'm assuming. Explosion, but like a magical explosion. So there's other things going on with it than like regular burns, you know. And Jyrene teaches here. She says, "We have been given some time. The head of the Black Watch reports the damage to the sky shouldn't be visible for another 2 or 3 days, which gives us at least 2 days to craft an official response." I thought that was weird because, like, in the last chapters, when the explosion happens, I thought that we pretty quickly went outside and saw from the perspective of 2 people who saw the crack form right away. And maybe I misunderstood the timing of that. I don't know. But we would like to have you use the Aptasia immediately, but it's being inspected for damage by as many trustworthy experts as we could scrape up. And I just can't get over the fact that this thing did what it did, and they're still willing to have Calder try and use it. It just feels so rash. And none of them really knows what all it can do, because the only person who has ever used it was the Emperor, or I guess Kellerac, but like he's a fucking great elder, so he doesn't count. And I just can't see being willing to like pop another person onto it that quickly. Look, they are inspecting it, they're trying to figure out what's going on with it, I get that. But it's so risky. And I don't really understand what they think the advantage is going to be compared to what the risks could be. So, yeah. Calder is thinking about how they have to investigate this thing, but none of them are readers, and how, like, incredibly tedious that must be. And she says, As for your attacker, we have confirmed that he was a champion. As far as we can tell, he was in good standing with the guild, though records have been spotty at best. And Calder says, arrange a meeting with the head of the Champions Guild. He can answer for the actions of his men. Teach's cold eyes slid over to him, disapproval written on her face. He slipped deeper into the opaque green fluid. He knew he shouldn't have used that tone with her, but if he was ever going to start being emperor, shouldn't it be now? With anyone else, he could have faked the authority and confidence he needed. He wasn't shy by nature, and taking command was largely a matter of self-assurance. But Teach was the woman who had killed his father. No matter how he tried, he couldn't even make himself believe she would follow his orders. I really enjoy all of the reminders that we get that Calder taking control in any given situation is something that he is consciously attempting to do. Because there are people for whom that is not necessary. They wind up in leadership positions because they have an air of command about them, and they have a presence that makes other people trust them and feel like they want to follow that person. And not that Calder isn't a good guy and not smart or anything like that, but obviously he doesn't quite have that, which is part of what I think is so interesting about him wanting to be the emperor. I keep thinking like he has to have a particular type of goal other than just that he wants to be emperor for the sake of it. But we're not getting any information about that. And I'm starting to think maybe I've been wrong. He doesn't strike me as somebody who is power hungry just for the sake of it. And if it's just because he thinks that he could do a better job than the actual emperor, because that emperor didn't care about his people the same way, we don't really hear Calder talking about concerns of that nature either. We don't hear him thinking about like, now that I'm in power, I will do X, Y, Z and right the wrongs, like I don't get what he wants. I don't understand this desire to be emperor when he seems to be aware that he's not really up for it. So anyway, she takes off, and as she's leaving, somebody just says, the emperor, well, she tells him the emperor never had a moment of privacy. Get used to it now. And then all of a sudden, Meia is behind him saying, you kept sliding in deeper. It gives you away. If you wanted her to think you were comfortable, you should have pretended to be falling asleep. And Calder didn't realize that Meia was there and is like, did Teach know you were here? And she says, I'm afraid she wouldn't welcome me back. She might not kill me if she recognized me, but she would have me detained. Why would she recognize you? And at first she's like, I'm not sure I should tell you. And then finally is like, all right, you know what? I think it's fine. I worked here when I was young, and talks about, the three of them. And he says, so we'd met before the Dead Island. And asks how many there were, thinking that it's probably a big group. So when she says there was only three, myself, Lucan, and Shera, I think he's a little bit surprised by how few. And also the fact that Shera was part of this, like, from the start. And he says something about how Shera keeps trying to kill him, to which Meia is like, she's not. You've been in the way of her mission, but if she was setting out to kill you specifically, you would be dead. Don't ever think otherwise about this. And she also says that the Empire will never be whole, because the consultants aren't holding it together. If we've given up, everyone should. And he is like genuinely moved by that in a way that makes him kind of frightened. So she says we fought against the elders for years. And he's like, oh yeah, what happened with the handmaiden? And she says that they killed it, and Calder assumes that can't be actually true. And then she doesn't clarify, and he finds out later on, like, no, yes, they definitely did. They just killed it. It's gone. And it was Shera that did it because she is soulbound and has a fucking awakened blade now. And he doesn't, like, she doesn't say it was Shera and she has no wake, but he is putting it together. And Meia is being so cagey about it that he's like, okay, yeah, that's what's going on. So in the end, she says, I have no information from the architects regarding you personally, so this is only my opinion, but I don't believe you are in direct danger from us at this time. Why not? You're the independents against the Emperor, and I'm the Emperor. She placed a hand on his shoulder. No, she said, you're not. Which is so insulting. She basically is like, oh, sweetie. Ah, it's so embarrassing. So Calder gets out of the bath and gets dressed. He is being brought to see Jyrene. And once again, she's in a cell. And they have some moments of seeming to get along, but Calder is very aware of the fact that she is attempting to ingratiate herself again. And when I say ingratiate, it sounds a lot more cynical. I think Jyrene genuinely loves him, genuinely believes what she's saying is true, and is just trying to return to the kind of relationship that they had before because she feels the same way about him that she did. And he keeps backing up, literally, like kind of stepping away from her as she approaches him and keeps his guard up, which she notices and is obviously kind of saddened by. And I am not mad at Calder at all. He actually did better at keeping his distance from her than I was expecting. But yeah, so she says something to him that really got me a little bit. She says, the Emperor, let's see, whose reign was already arranged by the Great Ones. He tells the guards to leave. The Great Elders did not arrange for me to be here. They may have foreseen it, but they are not the reason I'm standing here today. Jerry's mouth hung open, and she looked at him in a mixture of disbelief and disgust, as though he'd just announced he was absolutely convinced the earth was flat. How did you free your father from prison? With the Liatheton, sent by Kellerac. Before that, how did your mother gain the support she did in the guilds? She worked in the Black Watch for years, fighting elders. Your family's reputation is built on the elders, even the fights that drove your parents apart, all the elders. You really think the Great Ones had nothing to do with that? And before he can interrupt, most of your navigator work had to do with the elders. An elder is pulling your ship. Another one sits on your shoulder. How did you survive in the fight on the Great Island? Kellerac stepped in once again, leaving aside the fact that the whole reason you were there was because of a fight to inherit Nikothi's power. How did the entire crew believe in you so much they were willing to defy the Empire? You've been dancing to an elder tune for half your life. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. She's right. I mean, and he knows it. He is like thinking about the way that he was taught to think of the elders, and that he wasn't told to see them as monsters. He was told to treat them with the same kind of wary respect that you would have for a huge wild animal. And that he's suddenly sort of stopping and realizing that's not really how most people were raised. And let's see, just because, I'm sorry, I skipped a little bit here. Somewhere along the way, he'd begun thinking of the Great Elders differently. Maybe some were actively evil. Most weren't. They were simply alien and indescribably powerful. That was the crack in his defenses. That was where he'd gone wrong. He had even listened to Akhmagut. Even now, he didn't think the overseer had been wrong. It was impossible to imagine any prediction of Akhmagut could be incorrect to the slightest degree. But just because it was the truth didn't mean the elder was being honest. What did Akhmagut tell him? What happened? If you don't believe me, use the Aptasia. Check for yourself. And he basically puts up a bit of a fight on this, but in the end, he realizes that probably he will have to do this. And he tells her about the consultant saying that they killed a handmaiden, and she doesn't believe it. And he mentions Shera and that she was involved. The door opened and the guard stuck his head in. Sir, we need you to see this. There's something. And then the whole room shakes. Calder leaves. And next moment we are with Jyrene, and she is meeting with Kellerac. And he gives her back her soulbound vessel, her earring, which sucks. And he is extremely agitated that Shera is still alive. And he calls her the latest of the Amharani, which I know that we have heard that word before, but I don't remember if it means anything, if it's just a title. Sorry, George is in the chat. He says his ego is insane. I don't know how he could think he was the emperor with literally everyone telling him he's just a figurehead, because he's trying to make it true, and I sympathize, but dude. And Kellerac says the killer had one part to play and she played it. She was supposed to die in obscurity as she was born. And Jyrene says, you want me to kill her? And he kind of is like, look, I appreciate the suggestion, but babe, nah, you can't do that. And when she asks what makes Shera more dangerous, he says her place. She should not have survived. It was impossible for her to die before her role had been fulfilled, but afterwards it should have been impossible for her to live. You have chemical projectile weapons. When a bullet is loaded, it has not yet been born. It is born with the pull of a trigger. It lives only for a flash of light, and then it ends. The killer reached her end. Our plan, the vision we have for your world, ended with your kind in harmony with ours. Does it? Does it really? I don't know, man. So that's what he's basically saying she stands in the way of that. And I just don't know what to believe with him. I don't see why I should trust that he wants harmony. It doesn't seem like that's what he's been acting like. I don't know. So anyway, he gives the earring back, she puts it in, and the first thing she thinks is that she has to save Calder. And that is the end of the chapter. I have gone over, as usual. Even though this was a short section, I am fucking incorrigible. But thank you again very much, George, for commissioning this and hanging out with me. And I will see you all on Friday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.